Okay, so I think we'll get going. This is the last MMRC speaker series for the season. I am Dr. Ginny Brunton. I am a midwife and an RN. I'm an associate professor of nursing at Ontario Tech University in Oshawa, Ontario. And I'm also an adjunct scientist with the McMaster Midwifery Research Center. And I'll be hosting the seminar series today. I would like to start us off in a good way with a land acknowledgement, and I'm going to credit Beth Marie Davis with this beautiful land acknowledgement. On this day, I feel a deep sense of gratitude for the Indigenous stewards of this land. As a settler, I'm mindful of my responsibilities to live in harmony with the original peoples of Turtle Island and with the land. Beyond my gratitude, I'm also committed to actively listening, learning, and unlearning the narratives that have shaped my understanding of this land and its peoples as a step towards truth and reconciliation and the ongoing process of decolonization. McMaster is located on the territories of the Mississauga and Haudenosaunee Nation and is within the lands protected by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Agreement. Just to give you an advance plug for the fall series, we will be resuming in October 2024 with 6 new speakers on the last Wednesday of each month for the 2024-2025 season. And those speakers will be announced soon on our social media and website, mmrc.mcmaster.ca. This year, as you can see by the poster that is up on the screen, we had an excellent series of speakers. All videos from these rounds from each year that we've been running this series can be viewed on our website. So lots of good learning there and good information. Over the past year, our sessions have included the transition of student midwives in the Netherlands, gender pronouns and maternity care guidelines and clinical practice, interprofessional birthing teams, the alarm system in Ghana, psychological birth trauma, decolonizing midwifery research. And that leads us nicely to today's session with Dr. Caroline Matteo on women's experiences of the perineum in postpartum. So Dr. Caroline Matteo is a midwife trained in France. After some years of clinical practice, both in hospital settings and community practice, she became a midwifery lecturer at Aix-Marseille University Midwifery Department in 2020. She has a Master's of Science in Public Health and a Professional Doctorate in Health, Nursing, and Social Sciences, both from Glasgow Caledonian University. Her doctoral research, which was completed in 2022, was on postpartum perineal pain when the perineum is diagnosed to be intact. Her commitments to the cause of midwifery and women's health in France and abroad have led her to be elected as international representative of the French National College of Midwives, the CNSF, and future prospects involve more involvement in research around the postpartum experience, as well as working on a new French curriculum for midwifery education, which has recently been changed from a 5-year course to 6 years. So with that, I would like to welcome Caroline very much, and we look forward to your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this great introduction and opportunity to present the findings of my doctoral thesis. So a little bit of background to begin with. This topic is embedded in clinical practice, of course, and it's also influenced by the French context, which I will try and briefly summarize for you so that you can understand where it comes from, and of course by existing evidence on the issue of postpartum perineal pain. So in France, I don't know how familiar you are with the French systems, but midwives are the main provider of perinatal health care for mother and child, and that's hospital and community care combined. And we also have additional qualifications such as gynecological preventative care, vaccination, and abortion for all women, regardless of age and childbearing status. We have autonomy of prescription for treatment and blood and vaginal and urine tests and any imagery that we might need. And we carry out perineal rehabilitation sessions these can take place anytime during a woman's life, but specifically in postpartum in France, there's a Social Security reimburses for everyone 10 rehabilitation sessions in postpartum. So, so as you can see, this topic, when I was working as a midwife in clinical practice, I was in the forefront of women's health throughout their lives, and that's one of the reasons why the topic, I took an interest in the topic. And not working. Hold on. There we go. So what it really looks like in France in perinatal care is that you have two main pathways. If the pregnancy is straightforward, then women can choose who monitors their pregnancy. So they can choose to go to midwifery care or to an obstetrician or a GP, even if their pregnancy is straightforward. And if there's something, you know, pathological, then they will have to go to an obstetrician or a GP, depending on the issue. If they choose a midwifery care at the beginning of pregnancy and it remains straightforward, then they can go on in delivery, including in hospitals, to be delivered by a midwife. And if it becomes pathological, then they can they have to go to an obstetrician. So this is to say that it's quite complicated, but in any case, the important thing to remember is that in postpartum, they will do the postpartum visit with the person who monitored the pregnancy, and then all the rehabilitation sessions can be carried out by midwives or physiotherapists. So there's a variety of professionals that can care for a woman throughout their perinatal journey, if I can say that. But midwives are the only ones who can be there at each step of that way. So it puts us in a particularly good place to learn about their experiences. So in clinical practice, I had experience of these perinatal rehabilitation sessions for all women, and also for caring for women beyond the perinatal period, because when they come in in the clinic for contraception or any other gynecological issue, then they're likely to bring up any problems they're encountering, including perineal pain beyond immediate postpartum. So the initial questions that have arisen from this experience is, first, why do some women still experience pain postpartum after the perineal injuries are healed? Why do some women with a C-section also experience pain? What factors are there other than anatomic injury that are likely to cause or increase the pain? Would these factors exist for women with an intact perineum? And could these also add to the pain of women whose perineum is not intact? So just to set the scene regarding pain, pain is very complex, but the International Association for the Study of Pain had a definition which was the following: an unpleasant sensory and emotional experience associated with actual or potential tissue damage or described in terms of such damage. So that was dated from 1979. And they updated it during the research. So it became an unpleasant sensory and emotional experience associated with or resembling that associated with actual or potential tissue damage. And they also added 6 keynotes, which I wrote here. So pain is always a personal experience that is influenced to varying degrees by biological, psychological, and social factors. Pain and nociception are different phenomena. Pain cannot be inferred solely from activity in sensory neurons. Through their life experiences, individuals learn the concept of pain. A person's report of an experience as pain should be respected. Although pain usually serves an adaptive role, It may have adverse effects on function and social and psychological well-being, and verbal description is only one of the several behaviors to express pain. Inability to communicate does not negate the possibility that a human or a non-human animal experiences pain. So what about postpartum? Because this definition is really pain in general. Postpartum pain is pain in a very specific context where usually pain is described as something that reveals a dysfunction, which is not necessarily the case in a perinatal context. Birth is considered to be normally associated with pain, or something that we could call pain. There are several types that exist and can occur simultaneously, and the most described ones are uterine cramps, breast cracks, and perineal pain. And perineal pain is the most frequent cause of pain postpartum. So the initial research question was the following: what are the determinants of perineal pain when the perineum is diagnosed to be intact? So what does the literature say about that? So there are many articles related to postpartum pain in general, which study pain, postpartum pain, and perineal pain is one of those. So there are only 6 that specifically address perineal pain, at least at the beginning of the study. And the articles were very varied in terms of the timing in which the pain was studied. So 4 focused on short term, which was defined as before 7 days. And most of the others who studied what they called long-term pain, that ranged from 6 weeks to 2 years. So it's very difficult to make sense of such a variety of studies. So in the literature, we could identify factors that had a negative impact on perineal pain. So for example, baby weight, instrumental delivery, fatigue, depression, vaginal injury, swelling or bruising. Some of them had a positive impact on pain, such as analgesia, C-section, access to antenatal classes, access to healthcare, and expectations. And 2 determinants, which are breastfeeding or parity, are under discussion, because some studies found that they were protective factors, and some found that they were risk factors. So perineal pain, studies report between 70 and 92% of women who experience that type of pain postpartum. It can be long-lasting, and pain has an impact on health and well-being in general. And in postpartum, this applies to specifically to breastfeeding and bonding with child, and ability to carry out daily tasks that they need to do at that period of time. So what were the limitations of the existing literature? So the background literature on pain in general talks about how several factors affect the pain experience, and these could be emotional factors and go beyond the mere anatomic injury. The specific population of women with an intact perineum were never studied separately. They were a subgroup in some of the studies, and sometimes they weren't even studied at all. What I found was also that the determinants that were chosen by the research team, for example, a team of psychiatrists would look at the effect of pain or the effect of mental health on pain, and a research group of anesthetists would look at pain with regards to epidural, for example, and none of them took a woman-centered approach where they were actually asked what they thought their pain might come from or might be impacted by. And the factors of perineal pain other than anatomic injury were understudied, although there were other studies about treatment and suturing methods and things like that. So there was really clearly a gap in the literature. And the rationale for this study begins with that gap and is also underpinned by the importance of the issue because of the frequency of that type of pain and the impact it can have both on the immediate postpartum period and also in the long term on sexual life, among other things. So the research aim became to gain an understanding of postpartum perineal pain when the perineum was diagnosed to be intact. So it's a bit different from the initial research question, but digging into the literature, it felt useful to go back to, what is their experience, and then build on that rather than continue to produce research on the same types of elements that had already been looked at. So in terms of methodology, the choice was almost obvious to choose a qualitative perspective to gain an in-depth understanding. Also because it fit the topic of pain, which is an individual experience and has been described as such since then, and also because postpartum and birth are also deeply individual. The approach that was used is a hermeneutic approach using Gadamer's philosophy. The aim of this approach is to reach a shared understanding and questioning prior knowledge. So it's not really about finding out what is true for everyone. It's about blending the researcher's pre-understanding and through the researcher, the scientific community's pre-understanding, blending that with experience of the participants, and then create a new understanding which would be shared by both participants and researcher. And I found that this was also a good pick for the topic of pain and midwifery, because in my view, it reflects midwifery practice. Midwifery practice, we're caring for people who are not, who don't have an illness. So it's not our job to tell them this is going to be good for you. It's about finding what's the best way to go forward with that person, that midwife, and at that point of time in their lives. So it seemed to make sense in many ways. So the methods that were used, there are authors in Great Britain who have been using the Gadamer's hermeneutic research, and who are a nurse and a midwife. And they developed a framework to help researchers implement and practice that philosophy. And this method is composed of 5 steps. So the first one is to decide upon the research question. Then the second step, you need to identify your pre-understandings on the topic. Then step 3, to gain an understanding through dialogue with participants. Step 4, to gain understanding through dialogue with text. And then step 5, to establish trustworthiness. So it makes it gives a robust framework to apply the methodology while keeping the openness that you need to have when you're doing a qualitative inquiry and a hermeneutic inquiry. So how did I identify my pre-understandings? First, I wrote them in a diary. Everything I thought, everything I know about postpartum perineal pain. Then I discussed them with my research team and with a colleague, a midwife colleague. And then as the research progressed, I kept writing a diary of my understanding so that I could have a look at how it evolved over time as I was collecting my data. Then I went to recruit participants to my study. So in France, what I didn't mention at first is that home births is very uncommon. There are a few, you can't say it doesn't exist, but it's very rare. So a majority of women give birth in hospitals. So that's where I went to recruit the women who participated in my study. So the eligibility was women between 18 and 45 having given birth vaginally to a single live child. They were approached during maternity stay, and they were given, the ones who agreed were given an information sheet and a contact slip so that I could contact them after a month and schedule a first round of interviews. So I went to 2 maternity hospitals in my area of France, which are in small towns in a otherwise quite rural area. So the dialogue with participants, I began with open-ended interviews that were carried out face-to-face and that took place between 2 and 3 months postpartum. I did a verbatim transcript, and then I wrote field notes to, record the details of how the interview had unfolded and who was there and what were the circumstances and how this may have affected the data collection. There's also a reflective step that's included in this methodology. So following each interview, I wrote down a reflective account of the interview, and I analyzed each interview one by one in the first round. And then after the end of the first round, I already had some new understandings. So I decided to offer them the possibility of a second round. So what happened at that time was that they were scheduled, and then there was the COVID lockdown, and all the second round of interviews took place over the phone at that time because we're in the first strict lockdown of COVID. But we didn't know that when the interviews were scheduled, but that's how it happened. So these interviews were semi-structured because of the new understandings I had. I wanted to dig into some more into more detail. So I asked them how, what could they tell me about their experience of pain since the last interview, and could they explain what normal pain, because they all refer to the fact that pain was normal because they had just given birth, and what was it like for them? When would they consider that postpartum is over? And then I had the summary of the main themes that I identified in the first round, and I asked them how this reflected their experience. And then the reflective steps were ongoing, and I wrote what I called e-field notes because I wasn't in the field, I was at home, but about the interview and what were the circumstances of the women who were interviewed. And there were 11 participants in the first round, and there were 7 in the second round. And of the 7, the 6 was 6. Yeah, it was 6, and there were 5 of them who were at home, not working, with their husbands at home, and there was only 1 who was also at home, not working, but her husband was overseas. So that's the type of circumstances that I thought might affect the data and that I wrote down. So the recruitment process, I started in the maternities where there was a number 302 vaginal births during the time of recruitment. 61 had an intact perineum or diagnosed as such. And so 44 were willing to receive the information. Then I really collected 15 contact slips, and then I had 11 participants and only 6 for the second round. So yeah, it's always difficult to do studies in postpartum because well, the time is precious for participants, I think, is one of the reasons. And maybe COVID has had an impact on that too. So that's to give you an idea of the participants. So these are all pseudonyms, but as you can see, there's between 24 and 38 years old. In terms of parity, there are 2 primiparas and all the others are multiparas, which will not be that surprising given that I want, you know, the eligibility criteria was that they all had an intact perineum. And then the labor is, there are quite a lot of epidurals, some people might say. In France, we have a 80% rate of epidurals, so it's not it's actually less probably than the average. And and the baby weight is also, there's a large variety of baby weights as well. Oh, and the ones that are in blue are the ones who went through with the second interview. So then when you look at the data analysis and the methods that are provided by Fleming et al., so you have to go to first look at an interview, find an expression to illustrate the text as a whole, and then examine each sentence to produce themes and challenge them. Then the third, that's a sub-step, is to relate the themes to the meaning of the text as a whole, and then identify passages to illustrate the understanding. So really what you want to do when you're analyzing with a hermeneutic perspective is to go back and forth to make sure that what the findings that you're producing are really reflecting what the participants said. So that's an example of the coding. One of the specificities of this research is that the interviews were conducted in French, but because I was writing my PhD in English, I had to decide when I was going to translate some things. So what happened was that I coded directly into English because in a way there was an interpretation of what they said that would take place at that stage, regardless of whether I was doing it in English or in French. So I thought if I'm doing it, then I do it only once instead of coding into French and then translating the code into English. That would have been a double occurrence of interpretation. So that's the decision that was made. And then the reflexivity was ensured by the diary, writing field notes, and ongoing evolution of understanding. And then the step 5, if you remember, was establishing trustworthiness. So to do that, I used member checking. So I provided a summary of individual interviews and their analysis and sent them to the woman to make sure that that's what she really meant. I used quotes to illustrate the themes, so going back to the participants' meanings after I'd finished the analysis. I also sent a final version of the findings to the participants. And then there was also an unexpected thing that happened was that the first time that I wrote my findings, because I was a new researcher, I didn't know, I hadn't realized that you needed to write the line when you quoted, you needed to write the line. So I hadn't written the line, so I had to go back into my interviews and find the quotes that I translated, which were written into French. So I counter-translated them, and it helped me. In fact, it was hard work at that point, but it helped me confirm that I had translated it correctly, because if I counter-translated, then I would find it. And I think if and when I do some research in 2 languages, I will use that on purpose next time. So regarding the findings, the 3 main themes that that came out of this research, the first one is about the nature of the pain, and what was really interesting is that what they said was, you can't call it pain, it's not called pain. Or all of them started their first interview by saying, I'm not sure I'll be able to help you with your research because I didn't experience pain in the perineum. And then they went on talking about an hour and a half about their experience of what the perineum in postpartum. So they couldn't call it pain because it's a unique sensation, and for them, pain isn't normal, and this is normal and expected. It can't be called pain either because it's not limiting. It doesn't keep you from doing looking after your child, looking after your home, having, doing your daily life. They also said they couldn't call it pain because it was more like looseness, and that was more worrying to them than actually experiencing pain. And some of them also mentioned that they didn't have time to call it pain because they were too busy with other concerns, and it was all the rest of the issues that they were facing were taking up all the space, and they didn't actually have time to name it. So that was the first theme. The second theme was reassurance and normality. And the two last themes actually are about it's not how they it's how they welcome the pain and how they manage it rather. And one of the ways that they have to manage this pain is to get reassurance in the fact that what they're experiencing is normal. So to do that, they use knowledge that they have and their connection to their body and their confidence as well. They explain that pain, if you can call it that. They also sometimes said that the fact that they were pleasantly surprised because they expected to experience something much worse, then that was reassuring. They used comparison with others, so that could be other people in their circle, or it could be other births that they already had experienced and where they had experienced worse sensations in the perineum. And they were also saying that they knew it would hurt, but they didn't know how. So they didn't have any the expectations were unclear, and that was not necessarily helpful to them. And then what they described also as very either helpful or unhelpful, depending on how it unfolded, is how they were able to manage what was unexpected. So they said that the pain occurred in a context where everything was new, so they were adjusting to a new kind of normal. And how can you say what's normal when nothing is really like it was before? They also said that they were feeling overwhelmed by the event as a whole, and then the experience of perineal pain was added to that. They said that it was helpful for them to lean on a positive state of mind and to have a positive experience of birth, and that went through having a control and empowerment over the events of birth. And having the feeling of undergoing delivery, then that would make the experience of postpartum pain be perceived as more negative than if they had felt ownership over birth. So the strengths and limitations of that research is it's quite a unique qualitative study with a women's perspective because nobody had studied the intact perineum, and there's also only regarding postpartum pain, there's only one qualitative study, which is quite old now. There are a lot of multi-paras, and when you look at the literature on perineal pain, it's quite often that you have only primiparas, and there's not really any explanation for that. But on the other hand, it also means that maybe, for example, the theme about looseness might be also might be caused by the fact that they're multipara and not mainly and not primipara. And then the COVID context and the shift in data collection method also definitely had an impact on the findings. And in specifically the second round, they were talking, maybe they would have talked about going back to work and things like that, which they didn't because, you know, it was not possible. So probably if we'd done the same interviews at what we could call a more normal time, then maybe it would have been different. So in the literature, I can't see. Sorry about that. So what is confirmed in the literature is that the pain in a perinatal setting is normalized. That's also already been described. That pain is not the focus in postpartum. Some literature has talked about that as well, that the concerns are for the child and that women are expected to cope, that pain cannot be isolated from the event. So positive emotions lead to better experiences and better coping. And they're also the only field of research that I found that was quite similar to birth is the pain expectations in triathletes, because it's the only area that I've found where pain is associated to a positive event and not to an illness or something that isn't normal. And then Aix-Marseille et al. Studied postpartum and explained that expectation and preparedness leads to realistic expectations of pain. So that's some of the things that we can find in this study that have that echo the existing literature. What is new is that that perineal pain is not labeled as pain, and that's really interesting because I don't know how it's done in Canada, but if you go to a postpartum ward in a French maternity, everyone's going to say, well, what's your level of pain from 0 to 10? So if they don't consider what they're experiencing to be pain, then maybe they're going to say 0, but it doesn't mean that they have no issue to talk about, and we're not asking the question correctly. The new finding is also the association between the experience of postpartum pain and labor pain. That seems to be something that we should look into. There is also an important finding is how important it is that they don't have that feeling of disempowerment, because it's something that's been quite described during labor, but in postpartum, it's not that clear. And also something that's quite surprising is none of them mentioned any treatment when they talked about perineal pain. So the shift in understandings for me was that I discovered that the women relied more on their inner resources than outside help. That they didn't really necessarily want to remove the pain because they considered it to be normal and they only wanted to be able to manage it better. That their experience of postpartum pain is associated with their experience of birth pain. And that confirmed the importance of empowerment over postpartum as well, and not just over labor and birth. So the new understandings that were produced was that what's important that we manage is to give that the women have an ability to give meaning, so to give them the proper words to express this, and that means for us to ask the questions in a more appropriate way, to provide some explanations on the pain and why it exists and what they feel and why they feel what they feel, to of course provide them with a positive birth experience. And they also need an opportunity to confirm normality. So that's maybe influenced as well by the French context, where I feel having knowledge of other contexts in other countries, women are not very given the opportunity to decide for themselves how they feel, and it's more the practitioner who's going to tell them, this is normal. So that's important as well. And then to help them and to get the tools to have the capacity to manage what is unexpected. So self-confidence, preparedness, and a positive state of mind. And that's what midwifery can do that very well, regardless of the context. So on practice, the impact on practice would be to question the use of the word pain when we use numerical rating skills. It also led me to question the use of the word intact when we're talking about the perineum postpartum, because one of the participants actually said, the intact perineum, that's before birth, after birth, and nobody can use that word. So it's also a call to ask questions differently, and also to question what the women expect us to do regarding the pain, because it's not because they report pain that what they want is to have a paracetamol or whatever pain relief we can provide. On research, I think it calls for further research on multiparas with a non-intact perineum, because it's under research as well. Further research on the meaning given to pain and its perceived normality in the context of postpartum, and further research in other contexts than France to see if these views are shared in the various backgrounds where women give birth. I think I'm done.
Great. Thank you very much, Caroline, for that very interesting presentation. There's a lot of implications there, I think, in terms of practice, as well as in terms of future research and designing interventions. So I'm kind of looking at that with multiple hats on. I wonder if there are any questions from the audience. Rush has put some instructions in the chat. To ask a question, you just type it into the Zoom chat. There's a little button down at the bottom, or you can raise your hand online and turn your video on and your audio, and we can ask you to ask live if you like as well. So perhaps while people are thinking through that, I'm going to start us off by just asking a question. I'm interested to know if the findings of these from this study is particularly different from what you see in your clinical practice. Like, how did you see these findings in relation to what you see in clinical practice?
Well, I was surprised to see that I uncovered so much more of their experience through the research and how asking questions in clinical practice is different from asking questions in research. Yeah, I think it confirmed some things where there was an intuition, if I can say that, because I could tell that the findings that women said, you know, I need to ensure that it's normal, that I experienced that in clinical practice, but how they said that how they welcomed or the pain, or how they felt about birth, I could see that sometimes they felt that they had been disempowered during birth, but I didn't see the relationship with their postpartum experience. It wasn't as clear in clinical practice as it was in this study. So it was more in depth, but it didn't contradict what I experienced in practice. But I'd be interested to hear other practicing midwives and how they feel about it, if it echoes what the patients and women say to them in clinical practice.
Yeah, comments from people in the audience. Is this something that you recognize in your practice?
It's okay to say no.
They're all shy. It's quite possible. I know from my clinical practice, which is a while ago now, that you know, that desire for normality and reassurance is very I experienced that as well. So it'd be interesting to see if it's similar within the Canadian context. Okay. Other questions? Okay. I wondered if you noticed a difference between multips did they sort of talk about differences in pain from the current pregnancy compared to their previous pregnancy?
Yes, they did. So one of the things that I wrote in my thesis is that I had 17 participants, but in truth, I had the accounts of much more births because they all talked about previous experiences, and most of them they kind of described, and there are two of them who have it's their third child. So, and one of them is the fourth child. So they explain how they went, the different steps of, they prepared better and better every time. And it was more their experience and their pain. And one of them actually described that, the pain that's difficult to deal with is the pain when it's not your pain. It's pain that's imposed on you. And they talked about induction as well as something that was quite negatively impacted their pain during labor and birth, and their perineal pain as well.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Julia has her hand up. Thanks, Julia.
Hi, Caroline.
Hi,
Nice
Julia.
to see you again. That was a great presentation.
Thank you.
I'm really intrigued by that discussion about or the theme of I guess defining sensations as pain or not pain in relation to kind of the expectation of what's normal. And how much what people report is really based and informed on what they think is normal. And that's not necessarily something that's endogenous, right? That's something that can be put upon them based on, a million different pressures and forces and it's such a hard kind of, you're between a rock and a hard place when you think about consenting, you think about preparing people for how to deal with their sensations after delivery, when you're trying to balance kind of empowering and disempowering people, because sometimes inadvertently, or maybe sometimes deliberately, you think about the fact that you might be dismantling what they expect is normal. And that could be very kind of triggering or trauma inducing, especially even in times when I think, birthing parents are often expected to just be happy that they have a healthy baby and to put their sensations of all kinds on the back burner and kind of normalize and thinking that that's what they should do if they're a good parent. And so I just find it really intriguing. It has inroads into a lot of the different projects that I'm thinking about and trying to conceptualize about pain. And anyway, I just wanted to raise that and just say thanks so much for this. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, it's like regarding expectations, there are studies that say that expecting higher pain that actually occurs is helpful, and some others say that it's the opposite. So it's really unclear if we should prepare them for the worst and then they'll be happy, or should we, and how do you prepare a person for something how you don't know how they're going to experience it? So I think that's one of the questions that remain. There was also something about normality during the second round. I started, because they said it's normal to experience pain. If it hadn't been normal, I would have, asked someone or so. And then I one of the questions that I asked when they said that was how, well, then what would you have, is there something, can you tell me when you would have considered it not to be normal? And nobody could answer that question. And when I reflected on my practice, neither can I. At what time postpartum is it, is it not normal and you have to do something about your pain? Is there a time, a threshold, pain intensity? I'm not sure we can give an answer. So it's okay that neither can they. It's more about how the impact that it had on their life, they said, was probably the main criteria that would have led them to reaching out to a health professional.
Great. Thank you. I noticed there is a question in the chat from Debbie asking if research has been published. Have you published the research anywhere, or do you plan to?
It's midwifery, and it was in December 2023, I think. I can send it to you if you like.
Yes, we
But
could
it
make
has
that
to.
link available. Yeah.
Uh-huh. Okay.
Okay. Aisha also has a question in the chat. Can you share a little more about rehab services offered by midwives? You mentioned that this is the equivalent of pelvic floor physio. I'm wondering what kind of training midwives receive to offer this and how this has been implemented. Are there interventions that could support this population with the intact perineum and postpartum pain?
Okay. So yes, it is the equivalent of pelvic floor physio, and students are trained in midwifery school to deliver these, but there's also a great variety of different methods. And usually what midwives do is they have kind of an overview of that when they're in midwifery school, and then when they decide to go into independent practice, because that's where these sessions take place, then they'll usually go and do additional training on one of the methods so that they can apply it to their practice. And that would be a term course, maybe 3 or 4 days. But they can, yeah, that's how they're trained. And are there intervention that could support this what do you call, what would an intervention be?
I'm
Not
wondering
sure I
about
understand.
exercises.
Oh, right. Well, that's also a question that for the postpartum pain, it's difficult because if you do pelvic floor exercise and you're doing a vaginal examination and someone is experiencing pain, then likely they're not going to be very happy to attend them. So I think maybe there are also some specific probes which they can use to treat the pain. Sorry, it's that my children are, what's that? It's 6 o'clock here, so the kids are behind me. I'm
The
sorry.
magic hour.
Yeah, it's okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So that's
There's
the yeah, there's there's a specific machine with a probe that is supposed to help with perineal postpartum pain, but this still needs more evidence to guide who would benefit from it. And yeah, and the women with an intact perineum can attend these sessions, no problem. Even women with a C-section.
Okay, there's another couple of questions. Niberta's asking if there was any race-based analysis based on the knowledge that BIPOC birthers, especially Black women's pain, is conceptualized very differently.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. In France, we're not allowed to ask people about their race. So no, there isn't an analysis because yeah, it's we're all about equality and so we do research. And even I noticed when I applied to a British university, you have to take the box which ethnicity you're. This is completely forbidden in France. You're not allowed to ask people that.
Yeah,
So
same
we
in
can't
Canada.
so the research can't be race-based because they well, in one hand, the idea is that, well, there shouldn't be any race in terms of there shouldn't be any racism, but they negate the differences between that too. So sorry.
Yeah, interesting point.
Mm.
Yeah. And another question from Niberta about the concern of the looseness concerns that you highlighted in the analysis. And wondered if there could be further social analysis on this thought. For, example, is this more of a concern for cis hetero women who are expected to perform sexually for cis man partners and so on?
Well, when they talked about looseness at that point, and that's something I didn't put in my presentation, but none of them talked about sexuality at any point, which was intriguing. So it didn't seem to be a concern, and the looseness that they described was more in the first few days following birth. So they were more talking about it in terms of continence rather than sexual intercourse. But on the other hand, I didn't ask them the question because I didn't want to trigger concern that they didn't have. So I'm not sure, but it could be worth digging for another research.
Yeah, lots of questions arising from the findings, that's
Yeah.
for sure.
Mm.
I think we'll leave it at that for the questions. Thank you very much, and thanks to everybody for your questions. Ollie was going to add a poll. And there it is. If you could take a minute to fill that out, we'd appreciate that. It helps us to make these presentations more geared towards your needs and better. And also just to let you know, I think Rash put a comment in the chat that this is our last session for this academic year, and we're really happy that you could join us. We'll be sharing details of next year's season lineup soon. And please do remember that all of the recordings from this year and previous years are on the MMRC.McMaster.ca website. And with that, I'll wish you all a great day and enjoy the great weather. Take care, everyone.